Buju, kiwene no dine kwendish nakas, mikanaki kwendish nakas, mainganandodem. This is where I'm from. And I'm very thankful to this place where I belong. It's a pleasure to be here. And when I say this place I belong, I don't actually mean the Faculty of Law, although as of next week I will be probably spending more time here than anywhere else. I'm talking about the land that I belong to. And I'm just so thankful for that, and I want to acknowledge Anishinaabe Akin. Water has a spirit. We do not own water. Water is life. Water can heal. As women, we're responsible for water. We must respect the water. Water can suffer, and water needs a voice. Those are some of the legal principles that we've drawn from some of the research that we've been doing over the years. And when I say we, I really mean we in the sense that everyone that's sitting here today has been part of this important project, but that you are part of it too, and a lot of it has been guided by Spirit. And I hope that today, with our comments, you'll have a little bit of a sense of how important we feel that this work is, and how we've had such tremendous and great assistance from many sources in trying to take some of these principles of Anishinaabe Nibi Law and to articulate them to you, to young people, to ourselves. I think that's a big part of the work that we've been doing, is taking those things that we've known, that we've learned, that we're sharing with each other, and thinking about them in a very full and robust way, and trying to make them accessible to everyone. And make it accessible to everyone in the sense that no one owns the issue of clean and safe and healthy water. No one owns water in itself. You'll remember that's one of the principles that I listed off that we have talked about in the report that many of you have in front of you. And so we're very proud to be doing what it is that we have talked about, which is speaking for the water, ensuring that water needs a voice. Now, before I go any further, I'd like to introduce some of the elders that have worked on this project and that are sitting here today. And they'll have an opportunity to share some of the thoughts and stories that have gone into this work with each of you. And I have to say that they're going to share only such a small piece in the time that we have. And I encourage you to speak with them. Most of them are going to be here throughout the day, and to talk to them about what you've understood from the stories that they're telling, what you've understood from the report and the words in the report, what you've understood from the words that each of us is going to speak today, but also what your questions are in relation to that. One of the things that each of these elders has reminded us of is that the knowledge that we have, the knowledge we acquire, we apply it. That's our work, is applying it. And it's not about acquiring knowledge to store it in banks or store it in books, but to live it. And that's our responsibility. And so today, part of what we're doing is tasking you with even more responsibility. Now you're going to think, I have too much responsibility already. You're going to pull out your BlackBerry and see your agenda and all the things you have to do, your ambitious research agendas, your publishing deadlines, your work that you have to hand in, and the responsibilities that you have. So we're adding to that. But we're adding a responsibility that has to do with life. And it's an honor. And we, in Anishinaabe culture, we talk about gifts that we receive. And responsibility, although sometimes it can be taxing, the right kind of responsibility truly is a gift. So we're going to ask you to take on some of that responsibility today in your work. So I'm going to start at the end of the table and work my way here we have a group of elders that has participated in this research that are here today. Alan White, who's from Whitefish Bay. Harry Bone, Kiskonen. Neil Kershane from Saging. Darlene Kershane from Saging. Violet Caballose, who is an adopted Manitoban Anishinaabe, originally from Ontario. And Peter Atkinson from Rosa River First Nation. I have to say, to assemble all of these elders in one room is quite an honor, and to be able to sit with them and learn from them is also. So why are we talking about legal principles? And why are we talking specifically about Anishinaabe legal principles? I'm sure some of you are asking the question. Canadian law has some answers to what we can do about water and clean drinking water and what our responsibilities are towards water. But it's a very small piece of a broader understanding. And that understanding incorporates Anishinaabe law. Those who are familiar with some of the work that I've done and that some of the elders that are sitting here have done is to say there is a place for Anishinaabe law in our understandings of law. Canadian law does not suffice. Canadian law is not the entire picture. And actually, the argument that I've put forward many times, and that I've heard Harry say, Peter, and many of our elders, is that we never gave up Anishinaabe law. We never put it aside. There are times when it wasn't front and center, but it is an important part of how we live our lives. And it's an important part of how we live on this land. And although we're not talking directly about treaty today, we are talking about Anishinaabe water law, I can't not mention the treaty, because treaty for us is the mechanism by which Anishinaabe law was recognized by the other treaty party. And the Queen and her representatives who made treaty with the Anishinaabe of this area were acknowledging the procedural law, the protocols, and the substantive law of the Anishinaabe. And the treaty itself confirms the continuation of Anishinaabe law in this territory. And the treaty is the legitimate process by which anybody who did not belong to this land prior to treaty actually came to be upon this land. So for those of you who are wondering, why do we talk about Anishinaabe water law? It's the law of this land. It's part of the law of this land. And it's confirmed in the agreements to share of the treaty. Why talk about water in terms of law? There are a few different answers to that. And there are a few different answers to why we talk about Anishinaabe law, period. We can look at worldview, we can look at culture, we can look at history as ways, frameworks for understanding various issues. But in terms of understanding Anishinaabe principles of water, we've thought it was important, I would say, I'll take on that responsibility. I thought it was important to consider law because it's at the foundations of how we govern ourselves. So let's look at the principle of why we have law. It governs the interaction between beings. And if you look at Western concepts of law, it'll say it governs the interactions between human beings. And in Anishinaabe law, we'd say it a little bit differently. It governs the interaction between beings, full stop. Because in Anishinaabe law, we don't consider only human beings as being the subject of law or the drivers of law. We consider something broader in all our relationships. We consider a scene, rock. We hold a rock, that rock is living. It is a being. We consider water as living and as a being. We consider the land as a living being. And we consider spirit and the spirits of each person and each thing to be living. And if you look at the language, which I'm not fortunate enough to have a strong grasp of the language, but I'm thankful for my teachers that do, and they will tell you that the language is very different in terms of what we acknowledge as being animate beings in Anishinaabe. So if you say the word for a rock in the language, it actually gives us an idea that it's a living being. And why is that important? Well, because in law, we have that idea that law is governing our relationships between beings and our actions, governing our interactions between beings. So that takes us to the foundation, the starting premise of Anishinaabe law. I feel like there should be a drum roll here. Anishinaabe law is all about relationships. That's where we start in terms of our understanding of Anishinaabe law. And it seems pretty straightforward and pretty simple, but it's so key to understanding where we go from there. So we start with this idea of relationships. And then we can understand that those relationships are with a wealth of different beings. They exist in multiple and in mutual relationships. And often when I talk about Anishinaabe law, I'll have this wheel of various different beings with whom we interact. And sometimes it's a bilateral relationship. So in some cases, I will have a relationship with another individual. And sometimes there's relationships between nations. But sometimes they're tripartite or multipartite. And for those of you who are non-lawyers and giving me blank stares, that means involving more than two people or two things, two beings, involving multiple beings. And those relationships evolve over time. So that wheel of those relationships interacting is very important to the understanding of Anishinaabe law. Part of what we need to understand about Anishinaabe law as well is that it's not bilateral in all circumstances. Whereas Western concepts of law often are. Often Western law, and I use Western law as a broad term to define British common law, civil law, everything that is not Indigenous law, I kind of lump into this category, which may be unfair, and we can take that up in a discussion. But Western law has this idea that there's rights and obligations that are reciprocal. And in Anishinaabe law, it's very different. I kind of set aside the language of rights and obligations in Anishinaabe law because I don't think it's the appropriate framework. I don't think that it directly applies. I think that's a Western liberal framework, that idea of individualism and reciprocal relationships of law. Not to say that reciprocity does not apply in Anishinaabe law. It does, but in a very different way. So in Anishinaabe law, you can have an individual relationship with yourself. Very little of that exists. Actually, I can't think of an example of where that exists in Western concepts of law, Western systems of law. In Anishinaabe law, you can have those bilateral relationships where some rights and obligations may arise, but that's not the big part, the essence of Anishinaabe law. And then we have those multi-party relationships. And in some cases, we have a relationship in Anishinaabe law that is unidirectional, which seems a little bit counterintuitive. For those of you who have studied Cree worldview or Anishinaabe worldview, that idea that things flow only in one direction, you might want to challenge that or test that. But that is explained through a system of generalized reciprocity that I'll get into a little bit later. So we have this idea that Anishinaabe law can be unidirectional. And I think water is a really interesting place to start thinking about that, or at least one of the responsibilities relating to water is being unidirectional, where we can have a responsibility towards water, but we don't immediately have the corresponding right to water. Am I carrying you along on this stream of thought? Okay. So we have this idea that we can be responsible to water, but we don't really have any entitlement or right to draw from that relationship to water. And I think that's one of the hardest things to translate from a Western system of law to an Anishinaabe system of law, is that idea that we may have a responsibility, but we don't have a corresponding right. And I think where this comes into confrontation with Western law is in that idea of ownership, right? That we may have responsibility towards water, and in Western law we have a right somehow that attaches to those responsibilities. Or maybe we think our rights come first and then we have responsibilities that flow from those obligations, from those rights. And, you know, I would suggest that in Anishinaabe law we're thinking about it very differently. We're approaching it from the perspective that we have a responsibility to water. That's the first piece. And then the benefit that we may draw from that. And I'm using very carefully the word benefit instead of right. The benefit that we might draw from exercising our responsibility or applying the principles of that responsibility will be felt, but not in that immediate sense of having a right, of having an ownership or having a possession over water, which we see in Western concepts of law. So how is that theory informed? Well, are there any anthropologists in the room? Okay, one. In terms of reciprocity, and I'm not an anthropologist, so you can help me if you have any precisions on the language, but a generalized responsibility is taking us a little bit further than that a bilateral relationship. Right, and you can say, I have, in that relationship, I have a responsibility, but what will flow from it is undetermined in time, in space, in nature. And I think that's where Anishinaabe law may have been mischaracterized, especially in the fur trade era. There was an idea in the fur trade era that, you know, Anishinaabe would do this, and the fur traders would be doing this, and that concept of gift and reciprocity back and forth was immediate. And that idea of generalized responsibility and reciprocity leads us to think that it's okay not to know the exact consequences of your actions, but to know that in some sense there is a reciprocity that is attached to your actions. So that's one of our big distinctions in terms of Anishinaabe law and Western systems of law. And I know it's very theoretical, and we can definitely talk about it more, but I would encourage you in your work to seize this idea that it isn't always about immediate trade-offs, payoffs, and direct rights and obligations between two people. I think we need to set that aside if we're looking at water from an Anishinaabe legal perspective. Another important piece of the understanding of Anishinaabe law, and I should say Anishinaabe Inakanagewan, because that the words embody something bigger than I think Western words of law do, is the sources and foundations. Are there any bright young law students in the room? Okay, great. I love that you've put yourself in the category of bright. I would agree. I know you both. So, what are the foundations of Western systems of law? Well, we have property as the primary foundation of Western legal systems. And even if we look at systems of British common law, and if we even look at the Canadian Criminal Code, at its foundation, most of it is rooted around property and protection of property. Even crimes against the person, persons are considered to be property. And that has evolved over time. It might be less obvious on its face when we pick up a criminal code today, but we do understand that property is at the source of almost all Western law. And property not in the sense of collective property, but very individualized. And the system itself is articulated in a very individualized way. My right to this, my human rights. If we look at international law around human rights, it's very individual. We look at the Canadian Charter of Rights. We have individual protections. Now, there are two exceptions that I point to in Canadian law on individualism. Those are two forms of collective rights that are protected. And they are Section 35 Treaty and Aboriginal Rights and French language rights in the collective. But even in the French language rights realm, you have individual exercise of a collective right. And in the Charter, we find individual rights that attach to certain groups, but again, it's that individual exercise. So we look at Western law and we can say, at the roots, at the foundations, let's dig down. At the bottom of that tree, in its roots, what are we seeing? We're seeing concepts of individualism and protection of property. Protection and ownership of property. Okay, so that's our Western legal framework. Now let's contrast with Anishinaabe law. What are the roots? What's in those roots of Anishinaabe law? Well, my basic understanding at this point in my life, and I can't say that I know everything that I need to learn in my life or that I have a full understanding. I'm still learning this. But my understanding at this point in time is that Anishinaabe law is about relationships. And that's what I told you right at the beginning of this talk, is that we found our law, we root our law in relationships. There's no individualism. You have an individual exercise at certain points in time, but again, in that concept of that generalized reciprocity. We're not removing it from the collective. And I'll explain why. It's because we don't root our law in property. Our law, Anishinaabe law, is rooted in leading a good life. And leading a good life at some points in time may entail use of land, but it will also entail having clean water, living in relationship, exercising our responsibilities, and ensuring that everyone is leading a good life. I often tell the story, and some of you may have heard it before, that I humbly, in exploring this idea of Minoba Matiswin, asked an elder to explain the word to me. What does it mean? Minoba Matiswin, good life. And being a student of the language, learning the language right now, I said, okay, well, why do we not put a prefix in front of it, right? Because when we're talking about something that's collective, we'll say ki, or we'll talk about it in terms of the group. When I'm talking about myself, I'll say ni, and ni, rooting it in mine. And do we ever say ni Minoba Matiswin, my good life? And the elder laughed at me. And it wasn't you, Peter. He laughed and he said, there's no such word. We never use that word. Because there is no individual good life. It is the good life of you and all the beings around you. So the people, the plants, the animals, the earth, four-legged, winged, the fish, all those things having a good life. That's what ensures that you yourself are having a good life. And that understanding that there was no such thing as an individual good life was a huge revelation. Because we don't see that in Western systems of law, in that individualism, in that protection of my individual right to food and shelter and warmth and my right to clean drinking water. So if we take that framework of relationships and Nimi Minoba Matiswin, or Minoba Matiswin, our good life, the good life, right? And actually that's the translation, is the good life. It's not even our good life, it's the good life. We can see how that might inform some of the work that we're doing on clean drinking water. And some of the statistics that Aimée put up on the slides and the information saying not everybody has that good life. And what does that mean about the rest of us in living our lives? Well, from an Anishinaabe legal framework, we're not living a good life if the people with whom we're in relationship are not living a good life. And how do we take that law and apply it? That means we have a responsibility to the collective in terms of ensuring Manitoba Matswen. Now, Western law uses words like ownership, control, access, property. And we had to set those words aside in terms of our understanding and our work and start to talk about relationship with water and relationship with spirit of water and protection and care for water. Care and kindness are two very important parts of Anishinaabe law. And we can talk about that further. And I won't delve into it today, but it's, I think, a very important part of understanding Anishinaabe law is that kindness and caring. So, first of all, how do we access this framework? What do we do about it? How do we apply it to our work? That's where the work of the elders and this research project, I think, is key in dialoguing. Because the work that we did was not about setting a path and telling you what to do. It was about sharing the information and making sure that it was available and that people understood their responsibilities in relation to water and Anishinaabe water law. I know we don't have a lot of time today, and I would like the elders to share some of their stories, but I would like to just tell you a brief story about how you can take this forward, because I think that's an important part of what's trying to be achieved through this conference, through these dialogues, is how can we share information? How can we take this and apply it in our own context? And it's a story about my grandfather, who knew the water very well, actually knew all the places on the Winnipeg River by name. And he used to be, before the hydro dams, actually travel up and down that river and create relationships between the Anishinaabe communities all along that river. And when he was getting a little bit older, we went fishing in my dad's boat. And we were walking to the boat launch, and my dad looked at him and said, "Do you want to drive the boat?" And at age 82, he said, "No, I think it's okay for you to drive the boat." So he sat up at the front, and he looked back towards my dad. And he knew everything that was coming up behind him. He didn't even have to look. He knew what was coming just by seeing the shoreline behind him. And we were cruising along. And for those of you who are boaters, you'll know you don't really talk in the boat because you can't hear each other. So we're just enjoying traveling up the river. And my grandfather, he says, and he points, and he points with his lips, telling my dad. And they can't talk, they can't hear each other. That's all his instruction. And my dad steers the boat in that direction. And we hit a rock, a huge rock, and destroyed the prop of the boat. And my dad was mad. And my grandpa just sat there, and we sat in silence. We finally got to our fishing spot, put our lines in the water, and so we're sitting there. There's a lot of tense silence. And finally, my dad asks the question, "Why did you steer me into that rock?" And my grandfather said to him, "I didn't. And I could see the rage in my dad's eyes. Yes, you did. He says, I wasn't telling you what to do. I was just telling you what is there. And you had to make your decision. You had to take that knowledge and apply it. And now I look back at that story, and I'm sharing it with you, not because it's a direct legal principle or it's a teaching. It's my understanding, the way I have started to understand Anishinaabe law. And at that time, I didn't understand it as Anishinaabe law. I only understood it later as being Anishinaabe law is telling you what's there. It's giving you the information. It's telling you about the consequences, the potential consequences of what you're doing. It's telling you about your responsibility, but it's not telling you what to do. That decision is your own. That is your exercise of agency and free will. But remembering that you act in relationship. So I'm thankful to him for that beginning of an understanding of Anishinaabe law, and that's just one piece of it. But I think it's informative because it gives us an idea of the underlying principle that Anishinaabe law, very contrary to a lot of forms of Western law, is not going to tell you exactly what to do. It's not going to say you must do A, B, or C, and if you don't, the consequence is D, E, and F. It's saying this is what we live. This is what your responsibility might be. And if you don't pick up that responsibility, if you don't accept those things, if you don't act in relationship, here are some of the consequences that may arise. So that's the beginning of my understanding of Anishinaabe law. And like I said, I'm still working on it. And I hope that we can work on it together. You have in front of you, most of you hopefully have a copy of this report. And you can see the title page up on the screens here. And it's called Anishinaabe Nibi Law Report. And this is a summary of the work that we've been doing for over a year. And that started with a gathering at Shibashkurian, at Rosa River at the Rapids site, which is a ceremonial site. And we spent 4 days in a teaching lodge trying to discuss Anishinaabe law, how it interacts with Western law, how Anishinaabe law tells us about our responsibilities to water, and how we can share that. And a lot of it was shared through story, and you'll see some of those stories here. And you'll see some of the legal principles that we wanted to share. And when I say we, it's the elders, some of the observers, gifted law students, and myself. We accept that this is not the final product because Anishinaabe law is also about learning and taking those steps and taking those responsibilities to learn. So in here you'll find our reflections on that gathering, further gathering that took place at the university here at Migiziagamik in December, where we went through the report and made some clarifications and refinement. We met again on Monday of this week and had a beautiful ceremony to bless this work and to prepare it to be shared with you and to help inform some of the work that you're doing. The elders have been clear in saying that if this is a partial understanding, and if you want more, you have to do that work. And the generosity at this table will probably not surprise you, but it definitely warms my heart in terms of knowing how much these elders are willing to share. And they've said, anything that you see here, anything that we've shared, it's yours. You take it, you learn from it, and you apply it in your way. We're not going to tell you what to do with it. And as the oldest sibling in my family, my instinct is to tell what to do. But that's not what this is intended for. This is intended to be information and sharing and teaching, and for you to continue on with the work that's here. And we've taken ourselves that responsibility in the sense that we haven't written a report and said, okay, we're done. We are on a journey of a lot more work, including a book that we'd like to put together so that these stories can be shared with youth and anyone who wants to pick up this work. And we'd also like to make sure that we're honoring our ways of sharing information. So reading and sharing stories not in an oral form is a little bit of a stretch, and we've acknowledged that. And we want to encourage people to take the stories and to learn them and to share them, to continue the oral tradition of sharing stories, or even to read the stories to someone else. Has anyone ever had a book read to them? It's quite an enjoyable experience, isn't it? Well, that's kind of what our elders do in sharing the stories. They're telling us about the book that they have memorized in their minds. But for those who may not have that gift, the opportunity to just read a story out loud and to share those words out loud, it brings in the spirit of those stories in a very different way. For the academics in the room, there will be some academic publications that surround this work and further gatherings. And I think we have a commitment to a gathering in June of next year again at Shibashkaryang in Rosa River to take this work, these legal principles, these stories, and to share them with whoever would like to learn more from them. And I encourage you to start thinking about that for June of next year as part of your learning journey. I have so many more things that I'd like to say, but I would like to ask Violet and Darlene to share some of their words and stories and thoughts about this. And as women, how they view their responsibility towards water. Before I ask them to come up, there are 3 people that are part of this core group that haven't been able to be here today. Dennis Whitebird, Florence Painter, and Sherry Kopanes. And I just want to share one quote from Florence Painter, who says that our stories are the essence of our whole being. And I think that she's very right in the simplicity of her way of explaining that. And Sherry reminds us, and I really appreciate that she reminds us all the time, that the knowledge holders have to acknowledge that the words they share come from time immemorial and were passed on to them by their ancestors or their relatives that still walk on Turtle Island. And that one of our greatest teachings as Anishinaabe is to always acknowledge the person who shared and passed their knowledge to you. So with that, I'd like to invite some of our knowledge keepers to come and share some of their stories and thoughts.
Bonjour. No de nas magaboet indishnekas makwadote. I'm also known as Violet Kebiawase. And I was really wonderfully pleased to hear about this endeavor, because it's a big challenge to do a comparative work with Western-based ideology, with law and Anishinaabe Nibi. I myself was one of the walkers, one of the women who walked around some of the Great Lakes. I walked around 4 of the Great Lakes, and it really added to my experience of, I guess, broadening my knowledge and my understanding of my experiences. And I think one of the most difficult things that is a part of this discussion is when we talk about the spirit. That's, I know, something that's difficult even in the academic community. It's a difficult concept to accept as valid sometimes. I know because I was working on my master's degree, and I always had to defend myself as Anishinaabe when I wanted to share from how we understand knowledge gathering, and so, when I was first going to university, I was at Sudbury, going to the university there, and I was waiting for the bus. We talk about how we need to speak for our relatives who don't have a voice in this world. And I remember it was really, really hot, and I was standing there, and I heard these high-pitched sounds, and I finally understood what they were saying, and I looked around, and I realized it was the plant beings. And they were saying, "Why can't anybody hear us?" It's very moving to hear that call for. It was almost like a call of desperation, because Sudbury was quite a polluted place at one time, and then they're starting to recover it now. But it's really important that the spirit of life and the recognition that all of life is alive, that we all have that within us. People call it the Western world, they call it our senses, right? It's our spirit that wants to experience life. And these part attachments of our body allows the spirit to experience life. And so, walking around the Great Lakes is something I challenge everyone to do. That's one of the best ways that you can learn about your relationship to creation, because you're part of creation. It's just maybe we're raised to think about ourselves in a different way. But that walking for the earth, walking for the water, will connect you to who you are. That's why our children are raised to go fasting at a young age. Because when you're fasting, you are reconnecting to a really, really special. You're maintaining that relationship. You're beginning that relationship to creation. Because when you're out there with no food and no water, all you are doing is then connecting it to that beautiful universe and speaking to them, speaking to the stars at night, asking the mosquito not to take too much from you, offering your tobacco, using your prayers and your songs to have that recognition. And for us, we have our spirit names. We're given our spirit name. And there are so many wonderful stories that can be shared of how creation acknowledges you and comes to you. Your clan comes to you, all the spirit helpers. You're looking at that earth and you're seeing all those beautiful medicines. And you start to realize, I am nothing without this creation. It is this creation that gives me life. It is those beings within the earth, no matter how small they are, they all have a role to play in that chain of life. They all need to be there. And we need to remember They're there before we have been. We're the last to have been created. We rely on them. So we need to think about that when we're talking about looking after the water, looking after the spirit of the water. And, I just want to share one little story again back home. And I had this dream, and in that dream I jumped off one of those things that they have on the water where you can dive off into the water, and I remember sinking deeper and deeper, and I was really amazed by the fact that I was not scared. I just kept going deeper and deeper, and I wasn't running out of breath, and I wasn't panicking. And then I heard these tiny, tiny voices in the water. And when I woke up from that dream, I went and talked to some really knowledgeable uncles and aunties, and they reminded me about the water beings, that we need to speak for them, we need to feast them and honor them, because again, we can't necessarily see them, and we just have to really be broaden our thinking. This is a place of higher learning, so we need to really broaden our thinking to include all in the decisions that we make, because, my teacher said to me, one of my teachers, my uncle said, whatever you think, do and say will move into the future 7 generations. So you have to be careful, even in your thoughts, because the Spirit hears you. If you think you're going to get away with your thoughts, that really made me become more conscious of how I live. And I still get myself into trouble, but I try really hard, and I'm so grateful for that. Nigani Gabo, my adopted dad. So that's what I want to share with you. If anyone wants to talk about the water walks I've been on, that's good for your weight loss. Shrinks your stomach really good. And it's a very healing connecting way to be. Miigwech.
Bonjour, Kineo Kwedish Nikas, Namedo Dame, Bejgo Mete. My name is Darlene Kashane. I'm from Seguin First Nation. And I sit on the Elders Council, I guess, for this project. And I thank Aimée and all the University of Manitoba for allowing me to come here. And what it sustains us. In my travels, when I look around and I see that water, it slowly creeps. You can see it come out of rock. It's that powerful. It's that spirit to survive. And in my area, we're at the mouth of the Winnipeg River, mouth of Lake Winnipeg. And I see yesterday's report of how it's being polluted and how it's not living. And I feel that it's my responsibility to speak out against it, to do something about it. And I'd too like to share a story with you I had of my late father. In my dream, he came to me. And I didn't really understand it at that time, but I've come to understand it. He was talking to me and showing me the land. And he grabbed my face on both sides with his hand. And I had to look at him, and he said, I want you to take care of the land. And he wouldn't let my face go until I said, okay. And I've thought about it, and I've looked at my surroundings, I've looked at how they all interconnect. Without one, you can't have the other. Without water, there's no life. Without the land, there's no life. They all connect. They're all a part of us. And I used to see my parents do their ceremonies for our water, for the water spirits, for the land. And it wasn't only just my mom or my dad alone, they did it together. And it's not only the responsibility of the women, but also the men. You need that balance. So that's what I want to leave with you is we're all responsible. We need to take that step up and take that responsibility for our water. It's a very, very powerful. It can sustain us, but it can also take us. Miigwech.
Bonjour, de basana kod nishinikaz, mikinak dode. Nasengi pindigim midewigani. I want to thank our grandmothers for the presentation. When the men speak for the water, sometimes we need to ask the women for permission to talk about it. In respect for that's their responsibility. So briefly, I want to say, I want to ask them if I could say something. And the thing, and the work that we do, the book that was made and we put together, it's always important to remember that we need to look back. We need to know where we come from in order to know where we're going. And the grandmothers and the elders that have worked on this book, they're doing something. They're doing something. I don't want to put a negative point on this, but in a lot of things that we do, there's always going to be criticism. But in saying that, though, when we do something, I like to ask those people that are doing, criticizing, what are you doing? What are you doing? So I'm really proud to be a part of what was developed here, what was made. We did it. We were going to do it whether or not we had funding. Remember, Aimée says, we'll do it anyway. We'll get together. And so we need to know where we come from in order to know where we're going. And if you look back to our people were looked after the water. Well, I don't know if we looked after it, but we didn't do any harm to it. In the 50,000 years plus years that our people have been here, not one lake, not one river, not one pond, not one brook, creek was ever polluted because we looked after it. And what Aimée said here about the right to drink water. Yes, everybody has a right to drink water, but I'm not big on rights, me. You have a right to drink water, but we never think about, do you have the responsibility to keep that water clean and drinkable for not only for us, but for future generations and that. So it's not about rights, it's about responsibility. What's happening to the water? We all know what's happening to the water. Then do something about it. All the things that they're putting into Mother Earth is causing the water to be polluted and that. And we have the power to do it, people. What are we going to leave for our children 7 generations ahead? There's teachings that we have for that. our thoughts are going forward 7 generations. And the teachings that we have as people, as Anishinaabe people, the teachings that we have, the Medewan teachings, Medewajumonan, they call them, Medewajumonan. We think about our kids 7 generations ahead, and those teachings are flowing forward. That's what the song says, that's what the teaching says. And they're flowing forward in the way that it's always flowed forward. We're teaching our kids, and they're the ones that are going to take those teachings into the future, 7 generations ahead. So what we do here about the water and that, it's going to be not only documented in that, but to also we're going to be teaching our children to continue to look after the water, do things. Don't be afraid to do things to stop these people that are polluting the waters, are polluting the land, the air. We all know the problem, yet we don't do anything about it. We're trying, but we got to do more. We need to do that because we need to look 7 generations ahead, and so our children over there too will benefit from the good life, minobimadiziwin, that you enjoy here today. We want our kids in the future to enjoy that same life, that same good life over there. So I think about them, and I thank you to the grandmothers for their presentations, their kind words, that. So miigwech.
Thank you so much. We're going to take a short break. If everyone could come back, please, for 25 to 11. We'll just take 10 minutes. And I encourage you to connect with the elders and with Aimée over the break and over our lunch break as well, if you have any questions or comments. Thank you.